Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about something with a heavy heart. Hate is unbending. It won't be undone. It won't ever stop as long as there's sun. As one group supreme, another suppressed, it never will stop. It never will rest. When we think about racism, and it's all over the news, and basically people are fighting today racism with racism. If you look up today's definition of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and partly there's a movement to try to change the definition, and I actually fear that people will change this definition. If you take a look at the definition of racism, it's a belief, at least according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a belief that a race is the primary determinant of a human trait and capacity, and that racial differences produce an inherently superior or a particular race. Which means that if you believe that based upon your skin color, be it white, brown, green, orange, purple, it doesn't make a difference, that you believe that is a determining factor in your traits and abilities, that would be racial or racism. So if anybody shares that belief, be it one direction or another by this definition, that would be considered racism and has been the definition from the inception of what racism was. There's a movement now to try to say racism should only be about power. Now, why is somebody trying to change the word? Why are they trying to say it about power? Why are they saying that it's okay, as long as you know power, that's not racism? It's prejudice, or it's this, or it's that, or they're trying to make it like downplay it somehow. That racism is only about power. By the way, the third definition for racism is racial prejudice or discrimination, which is the idea that you're going to discriminate or have prejudice against somebody because of their color of their skin. By this definition, anybody could be racist. Somebody African American could be racist. Somebody white could be racist. Somebody Jewish could be racist. Somebody Egyptian could be racist. It doesn't matter where you're from, your ethnicity, or your religion. Anybody can fit this definition. And as I said, there's a movement right now to try to change that. So I want to take a look at what's the problem with that and how we as a people should really stand up against this, because it's very detrimental, and I'm going to explain to you why as we see this.
For those of you who have heard similar viewpoints espoused by similar people, let me tell you this. That kind of lethal ignorance, that kind of viewpoint that disparages black people, number one, that condescends and talks down to us, number two, that draws specious, spurious parallels between white racism and black racism. Racism presupposes the ability to control a significant segment of the population economically, politically, and socially by imposing law, covenant, and restriction on their lives. Black people ain't had no capacity to do that. Can we be bigoted? Yes. Can we be prejudiced? Yes. Racist? No. The unintelligence of the formulation is problematic when any black person says that. Number three, when black people began to spew this notion that 96% of black people are racist because we vote for a black candidate, suggests that all white people who vote for all white candidates are therefore also unavoidably racist. By that logic, everybody in the world is racist and it balances out, doesn't it? It makes no sense. It is illogical and irrational to its core. What we see when we hear these kinds of comments are lethal self-hatred, the denial of the humanity to black people that we see reflected in the dominant white society, refracted through the prism of our own black lives. Unmolested by enlightenment, such people are peripatetic, that is, walking around virtuous, not in terms of their virtue, but virtuous, virtual expressions of degraded self-hatred. I feel sorry. I feel horrible when I'm in the presence of such mean-speaking, ignorance-spewing, incredibly cantankerous viewpoints that don't honor the integrity, the beauty, the diversity, the complexity, and the wondrous, rapturous intelligence of black people. That's why I hang with black folk all the time, because I know better than that. You heard? For those of you who have heard similar viewpoints espoused by similar people,
the fact is, this is Michael Eric Dyson, who likes to use the vocabulary. and says a lot of stuff that sound rather intelligent. But if you break down his argument, it's actually rather scary. And I'd like you to think about this for a minute. He just said that basically black people can't be racist because they don't have the power. So basically they can be prejudiced but not racist. And that the idea that if you vote for a specific candidate based upon the color of their skin, if you're a black person, that's not racist. But if you're a white person, you do it, that's racist. The reality is if you're voting for a person for the color of their skin, that would be. If you're voting for them because they have your best interests, they're politically part of your view, and they happen to be black, and you're black, that's fine. And if 96% of African Americans said the reason why they were voting for a black candidate because they agreed with them politically, that'd be absolutely appropriate and fine. If 96% of white people voted for a candidate because they agreed with the white candidate and they believed that that was the case, that would also be fine. The problem is that if the white people were voting for the white candidate because he was white, or the black people voting for the black candidate because he was black, then the nature of it is saying that I don't care whether it's for me, I don't care what their policies are. The only thing I'm caring about is the color of their skin. By that sentiment, based upon the definition, that is the primary factor is the color of the skin, that would be racist. That would be a racist motivation for a reason why you're voting for somebody or why you're not voting for somebody. But by changing this definition, you could say, well, what's the big deal? So we don't have that. And actually, there's a great interview with Don Lemon, speaks with Terry Crews, and this specific issue comes up. And again, this is where Terry Crews gets himself into a little bit of trouble, and he actually stands up for himself, which I really liked. But let's take a look at that one and talk about that aspect of this.
An activist, Terry Crews, facing backlash for tweeting, "We must ensure Black Lives Matter doesn't morph into Black Lives Better." Here's how he explained it. Are all white people bad? No. Are all black people good? No. Knowing this reality, I stand on my decision to unite with good people, no matter the race, creed, or ideology. Given the number of threats against this decision, I also decide to die on this hill. Terry Crews joins me now. Terry, man, you stepped in it.
Don Lemon starts off the interview by reading Terry Crews' statement, which Terry Crews was saying is that skin color doesn't matter, that you judge a person by their character, not by the skin color, which I believe is something Martin Luther King also says something about. But Don Lemon's statement is that you stepped in it. This has become controversial, something that 5 years ago everybody would have thought, wow, that's a great statement, that we don't judge people by the color of their skin. But Don Lemon starts off the interview already saying, Terry, you stepped in it.
You say that you're willing to, you say you're willing to die on this hill. You've taken a lot of heat for this. Explain what you were thinking and why it's so important that you die on this hill.
Well, again, I wanted to bring up the fact that, there are some very, very, militant type forces in Black Lives Matter. And what I was issuing was a...
Terry Crews identifies right away that there's a problem somewhere that he's aware of the idea of as a militant ideology underneath the organization. He's going to explain that difference in a second. But this is really important because I want you to listen how people listen when they don't want to hear something.
Warning. It's one of those things where I've been a part of different groups, I've been a part of different things, and you see how extremes can really can go far and can go wild. And when you issue a warning, and when a warning is seen as detrimental to the movement, how can you ever have checks and balances? In the 60s and 70s, airplanes went down all the time. And the reason they found out why they did was because the pilots could never be questioned. And when you have the leaders of the Black Lives Movement who are now talking about, if we don't get our demands, we're going to burn it down. Other black people who are talking about working with other whites and other races, they're being viewed as sellouts or called Uncle Toms. you start to understand that you are now, being controlled. You're not being treated as love. You're actually being controlled. Someone wants to control the narrative. And I viewed it as a very, very dangerous self-righteousness that was developing that, that really viewed themselves as better. It was almost a supremacist move.
Let me jump in
where
there.
they viewed that their Black lives mattered a lot more than mine.
Okay.
Terry Crews talks about something very important, where he's viewing that he was involved in a situation, and he was speaking out, and where he felt this idea, and he was seeing an aspect of supremacy coming out of that movement that scared him. Okay? This is important because we're going to see whether or not this has any effect on people's behavior and the way they act.
So let me jump in here. There's a lot that you said. You think Black Lives Matter is, you said you think it's an extreme movement? Because it's now part of the...
No, this is the thing. It's a great mantra. It's a true mantra. Black lives do matter. But when you're talking about an organization, you're talking about the leaders. You're talking about the people who are responsible for putting these things together.
I got you. So let me, Terry, you realize that even during the civil rights movement that...
What Don Lemon just did, I got you, is called dismissive. It basically says, I don't care about your point. I'm just going to go ahead and move on. He's now going to create a false equivalency and a false narrative. And I think this is a very important aspect. And this is what happens when people don't want to deal with the issue. Terry is actually making a very clear case about things that he's experienced and seen. And it bothered him. And he's saying that this is an issue. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how this issue manifests and whether or not we can draw conclusions about it based upon what we're seeing in actual people's behavior.
Dr. King was seen as extreme. That movement was seen as extreme. To people who don't want to make change, movements are seen as extreme. You can paint them easily as an extreme when they are not.
See, Don Lemons here is saying that you can paint a place as an extreme when there is no aspect of being extreme. And he's absolutely correct. That's actually happened historically, and it actually happens today, where people will try to paint people as extreme. But then, by that logic, then you can never denote that somebody is being extreme. Because all you could say is, well, now you're just calling it extreme. But that's not what's going on here to look at what Terry just said prior and what his experience was. It was totally dismissed and talked about now in the abstract.
This is very true, but also when you're talking about MLK, you're talking about Nelson Mandela, and even Malcolm X, they all realized that you had to have a non-racial component to these kind of movements, or there will be resentment, there will be get back, there will be, one of these people will tend to, listen, I don't want to move from one oppressor to the next. And one thing is really
who's the next oppressor? Who's the next oppressor?
Now, I'm going to end it here because this is what Terry's basically saying. And he says basically that I don't want to go from one aspect of oppression to the next. And Don Lemon is trying to goad him into, are you going to say black people are going to oppress people? I mean, we can't believe that because, again, it goes back to Mr. Dyson's idea that black people can't be having any idea of racism because they're not in power. So they can't be racist by that false aspect of the definition and actually the formula that people are trying to change this definition. See, words do matter, and they create a narrative, and it changes people's minds to believe certain things. It's a very powerful tool. Therapy is all about words. Right? You go to a therapist, I'm talking about mental health now, you're talking. There's no physical touching. There's nothing else that you're doing. It's all verbal. And there's a lot of power in those words. And how you use those words and what words you use when changes dynamics greatly. It's a difference between people going through divorce or being able to save a marriage. It's a difference between able to raise children that grow up healthy and secure or neurotic and having behavior problems. So words matter greatly. But what Don Lemon does here in a very disingenuous way is try to get Terry to say that black people could be racist so that he can say, well, no, they can't be because of that reason. So you'll say again, what's the problem? What's the issue? What can go wrong? If you take a look at the news stories that have been going on recently, there's a number of things that can go wrong. And I just want to go through, this is from the R.J. Young show. I'm only going to be playing for a few minutes, but he's talking about Deshaun Jackson and what Deshaun Jackson said. Now, Deshaun Jackson is a player on the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, and he made some anti-Semitic remarks. And let's talk about them a little bit. Sorry. There we go.
To take him to church. Because I thought about this for some time before I wrote down what I thought so that I know what I think. It's one of the things that I do every single day is write down what I think I know and then go check on what I think I know to see if it measures up to fact. Because if you listened to the show yesterday, I got a little too animated in a casual conversation with my man Mayberry about Hamilton because I have an intense dislike for conspiracy. Because conspiracy is a way in which we spread lies, not fact. And your feelings don't matter to fact. This is why I start this by saying, this cancel culture trash is just that. If your favorite people are being canceled, it's because they are ignorant at best or hateful at worst. Neither is a permissible excuse. Read a book, investigate what you believe, be done playing ball with these crusty clowns. Hitler canceled a lot of people. It's called the Holocaust. Hello. The headline to the ESPN story is Eagles Jackson after post, I don't hate Chiefs. That's the flag on the plate, and like 2019 OU Texas, we get to even start in on everything Deshaun Jackson thought he was right about when he shared posts to his more than 1.4 million people who follow him on Instagram. 910,000 folks follow him on Twitter. And a post he shared featured a quote attributed to Adolf Hitler that said white Jews will, quote, blackmail America. They will extort America. Their plan for world domination won't work if the Negroes know who they are, end quote. And he didn't stop there. He managed to fumble again before reaching the goal line when he shared two more posts on IG on Saturday and Monday that revealed his admiration for Louis Farrakhan, a man who both the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center view as anti-Semitic. His ignorance is damning. His ignorance is infuriating. His use of his platform in that way is also his right, according to the First Amendment of the Constitution of these United States. That right, however, does not protect you from being pwned by all those with a single clue.
So, again, Deshaun Jackson making really anti-Semitic remarks. I mean, they weren't light. They weren't lighthearted. They were very much damning. And I'm not one that agrees with the idea of we cancel people because of their belief system. I'm actually more of the Daryl Davis ideology of dealing with people who suffer with racial ideology, which is the idea is to hear them out and understand them to hopefully be able to deal with the logic and the rationality. I know some people say you can't rationalize with somebody who is racist. And I always say, well, ask Daryl Davis about that, because he has been able to do it incredibly well. And in my career, I've been able to do not nearly what he's done, but a pretty good job of helping people who have had racial ideology be able to look at it and be able to understand that people are people and not their race. And I don't mean that just to be disparaging. People have their culture. But think about this again. Does everybody agree in a culture with everything? And the answer is they don't. They're all individuals. They have different thoughts, very different opinions. You know, you have children that don't talk to their parents because of ideological differences. There are people that change their religion from the parents they came from. There are people that change who they believe in and what they believe in. So this idea that we are all a certain way because of our skin color is very damaging and hurtful. And I don't believe people need to be punished for their belief system. They're just wrong and need to be hopefully educated and hopefully be able to see reality. And the more you have that dialogue, the better it is. I think the aspect here is that Deshaun Jackson has gotten a lot of information from somebody who had a very strong belief, who I think is what Terry Crews is actually talking about when he's talking about there's these underpinnings. This happened in the Women's March as well. There were anti-Semitic remarks that came out from, I think, Ms. Soyor, Linda Soyor, if I'm saying them correctly. And there's a lot of these aspects of when you start breaking up people into groups, you start saying really horrific things. The show America's Got Talent had a very affable host named Nick Cannon, who just also recently came out with a very similar belief system to what we just saw, sadly. And I'd like to be able to do that next in terms of this, and then start looking at its effect.
Let's go to what it really is then. When we talk about the power of melanated people, when we talk about who we really are as guys and understanding that our melanin is so powerful and it connects us in a way that the reason why they fear black, the reason why they fear is because the lack that they have of it. So then when you see what, Dr. Francis C. Welsing talked about is that fear in that
just genetic annihilation
deficiency of when you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know that they will be annihilated. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. That melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul. That we call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less, and where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan, to where they may not have the compassion or the when they were sent to the mountains of Caucasus, when they didn't have the power of the sun, that the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear, they're acting out of low self-esteem, they're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
So then these people who didn't have what we had, and when I say we, I speak of the melanated people.
Right.
They had to be savages.
Nick Cannon, as you heard, described melanin people. And of course, melanin people are people of color. That's what melanin is, and that's why he keeps pointing to his skin. And the idea is that if you lack melanin, you lack compassion, because only melanin people have compassion. Go back to that definition that I gave you about racism. Believing inherent traits because of the nature of their color of their skin. But remember, Michael Dyson says black people cannot be racist. Again, think about this. Now, what does this ideology do? So, what if somebody has a false belief? What bad could happen from it? To believe that people of different color are evil, horrible, savage, animalistic? What I'm about to show you is not to disparage a group of people. The one thing I hate more than anything else is when people start to see something and go, oh, look at those people. These are not those people. These are individuals that have a distorted view of reality. They have a view that makes them hate, but they're individuals, not groups of people. So I don't want people to start to talk about the nature of, oh, look at them, because it's not a them. Each one here is an individual person, sadly, that probably shares a lot of the underlying ideology of the things that we heard in this, that you've heard in this video. That there's an underlying aspect that leads to the behavior that Mr. Dyson does not seem to recognize nor understand or want to take any responsibility for. Because all he's looking at it is his own point of view and about what his eye on the prize is. But what he's not understanding of what its effect is on other people and how damaging it is. So with that in mind, I want to look at three clips, I think. Three we're going to look at, although I could have picked out 100 clips. That was what's scary about this. But I picked out three that I think were representative of what I was trying to get across.
Calling for action today after a sharp increase in anti-Semitic attacks. The call comes after two violent incidents in Williamsburg in less than a week. One of them, a group of men assaulting a victim in traditional religious attire on Saturday.
And then on Tuesday, a second victim was randomly slapped in the face by his attacker. Eyewitness News reporter NJ Burkett has a story from Williamsburg.
2 assaults, 2 victims in just 1 week. Both were ultra-Orthodox Jews, singled out, apparently, because of how they were dressed. Punched out and cursed out with anti-Semitic slurs. And tonight, one community activist says the NYPD needs to do more to protect them.
This first one, sadly, is, again, the anti-Semitic aspect of it. Many years ago, I had a client who was a member of the Nation of Islam. And we actually got along well, even though his views of me, because of my non-melanin color of my skin, was that I was still the evil devil. But because he actually got to like me as an individual, he wanted to share information. And he came over to me after a group and he said, would I be open to listening to the truth? And me saying, sure, absolutely. And he brought me a book called The Secret History of the Jews. Now, the first thing I noticed about the book was the author was anonymous, which didn't strike me at the time. So I took the book and I said thank you, and I read it. And I read it from cover to cover. And what I read in the book was frightening. It was blaming basically Jews for a lot of the oppression of what has happened to African Americans through history. From the inception till today. And then I did research on the footnotes of the book. And I found that the footnotes did not match what the book was saying. What it was quoting wasn't true. I then did a little bit more research and found out that the reason why the book was written anonymous was to avoid lawsuit for defamation or those types of things. The sad part was when I came back to the client and I showed him what I learned about the book that he showed me. And after I thanked him for it, it hit him like a ton of bricks. He had a lot of difficulty with accepting that. He went into a lot of denial about it, but it did make an effect. I think that that's a much better way of having a conversation with somebody that helps actually make a change than to tell them how evil and horrible they are for such horrible beliefs and try to get rid of them. I know that Nick Cannon was fired from one of the jobs that he has, and I'm not in agreement with that. People should be fired just because they're racist or they have racist ideology. I think that people need to be educated when we see that they have racist ideology, to have a discussion about it, to actually open it up so that people start to see all the lies all of this is based upon. But to continue the sad aspects of this, because that book is responsible for a lot of what I'm about to show you.
Bandaged and badly bruised, 42-year-old Ari Ellis stands with his Brooklyn community just days after he was attacked on Eastern Parkway.
I don't understand why, They had to pick me.
Police say the Orthodox Jewish man was punched in the face repeatedly about a week and a half ago, left with broken ribs and a broken nose.
I wonder, do people realize this is anti-Semitism?
We would like people to help us to locate the person who committed this horrible attack on an innocent person.
Dozens calling for justice at the corner of Schenectady Avenue and Rutland Road.
Being able to walk down the street without being hurt is a civil right that every person has.
At the Crown Heights intersection, another Jewish man was assaulted Saturday afternoon while walking home from synagogue.
I greeted him hello and go and continue. Next thing I know is they said, I don't like Jews. Who are you talking to? I don't talk to Jews. He put me in a headlock and I'm trying to maneuver out of him. And in the meantime, I'm screaming, help, help, help. And the next thing, and he said, you don't need help. We're going to kill you right here.
The 52-year-old got a black eye, broken rib, and scratches after he says the suspect beat him for about 5 minutes. Two Good Samaritans were eventually able to pull the man off.
People get very, very nervous about what exactly is going on.
The Anti-Defamation League is offering a $5,000 reward for any information leading to convictions in these cases.
We're talking about, again, the horrors that's going on in the situations, the people that are suffering, dealing with being attacked for one reason and one reason only, their faith. And they'll be able to be identified by the clothing they wear. And what happens is, it's based upon an ideology. These aren't just, wow, look at them, attack them. Why? What reason? Because when you teach people to hate, when you teach them that this group is this way, and we're going to tell you about that group, and they are horrible people, and they're evil, it opens up for this to happen. This is one of the reasons why dehumanizing people of any type is wrong and racist, and it's got nothing to do only with power. Because in order to take power, anybody could take power in any situation, as you're seeing for your own self with your own eyes.
Many in the Jewish community are shaken as the NYPD investigates a string of hate crimes this week. It spurred one mother who lost her son to anti-Semitic violence years ago to send a message. CBS 2's Nick Calloway has the story.
It was 25 years ago that a terrorist fired on a van full of Jewish students on the Brooklyn Bridge. The anti-Semitic attack driven by hate, and it's a day Devorah Halberstam will never forget.
He shot up the van with over 40 rounds of ammunition, murdering my son Ari. He was the first one murdered with the Uzi machine gun and wounding others.
Halberstam has since devoted her life to activism, and she worries that the recent string of attacks against Jews in New York will only get worse.
I know what the taste of hatred is. I know what the taste of death is, unfortunately. And I know what begins with a swastika does not end with a swastika.
I think it's a great idea of explaining something. Whatever begins with a swastika doesn't end with a swastika. And it's very true. The fact is, it begins with the ideas. It begins with the words. It begins with the groups. It begins with telling people who and what they are. And it tells them what they're going to be. And sadly, this is what's happening. And this is the last one I want to leave you with tonight.
We're very concerned by what took place in Brooklyn, over the last Sunday into Monday. The two assaults were horrific. The imagery that was shown in the videos was really violent. These are violent attacks. And we know people in the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn right now are on edge and very concerned by what's taking place in their community. People I know, when they see that video, there's a shock and awe to this, and I think they can't believe that that's actually happening in this city. People think New York City is this major melting pot, liberal bastion, everyone comes together, kumbaya. I think there's a lot of great communication going on between the highest levels of leadership in Brooklyn, whether it's elected officials, clergy, but that needs to trickle down into the average person on the street. We've seen a dramatic uptick in anti-Semitism over the last 3 years. Just last year alone in New York State, we saw a 90% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, 100% increase on college campuses, 100% increase K through 12. Already this year, around anti-Semitic assaults, we've seen now, this is the 12th anti-Semitic assault this year. We cannot allow anti-Semitic or assaults on Jews or assaults on any minority group become normalized in the city.
And there you have it. Why you can't just say one group cannot be racist. We live in a world where there are different groups. There are people from China, people from Japan, people from India, people from Pakistan, people from Egypt, people from Lebanon. Everybody comes from different cultures and different backgrounds. We have to be able to see that every individual is an individual. You may love the guy from Egypt, you may hate the guy from Pakistan. But it's not going to be you hate Pakistanis, you hate the guy. You may hate me, but like my brother. And the reality is that each person is an individual. Things that we can like and things that we can dislike. We can't see people in groups. As I made mention in my group tonight, if you take two people growing up on the same block, even in the same project, and one puts on a red bandana and one puts on a blue bandana, all of a sudden now they want to kill each other based upon the colors of their bandanas, even if they're the same color. You can't view people based upon groups. It's dangerous. It doesn't mean you can't identify with a cultural aspect of yourself. Absolutely. Everybody should be able to embrace and look at their culture with pride and be feeling good about it. But don't believe for 1 second that that culture or where you came from denotes anything about you as an individual. You make yourself what you are. Not what your skin color is, not your cultural standpoint, not even the money that you have. There are a lot of people who are rich who are jerks and sick people and have problems and issues. There are a lot of poor people that are unbelievable and nice and good. There are a lot of people that are rich that are good and wonderful. But what do we like to do and what do people do all the time? Demonize. Demonize the rich. Demonize the owner of industries. Demonize whole sectors of people. Demonize skin color. And the demonization is horrible, horrific, and racist. And every time you say them, you are falling into that trap. I hope that you'll like this video. I hope you'll share it and it gets around and that people can actually think about this. I hope that if you haven't subscribed, please do. If you'd like to become a patron to the channel, hit the subscribe-star link below. And again, remember, hate is unbending. It won't be undone. It won't ever stop as long as there's sun, as one group supreme, another suppressed. It never will stop. It never will rest. I wish you a good night and good mental health.